I hope by now you're finding that your faith is growing stronger as you realise that what we believe is true. It isn't just a fairy tale, it isn't just a theory, it isn't just something written in a book for us to believe, but these are real events that really happened, really at a point in history. And those things can help us to have more confidence and more assurance of what we believe and go deeper in our relationship and hopefully encounter Jesus in a whole new way. But it does open up a question, and that question is one that we're going to tackle today, which is, if all of that really happened, why did Jesus have to die? At this point, I'm going to introduce us to a word which is one of the central foundational beliefs that we have as Christians, and it's the word atonement. Atonement literally means to make amends for a wrong or an injury. For those of us who've had a 12-step background, we'll be familiar with the idea of making amends. But it sort of means to atone for what we've done wrong. Taking action to correct a wrong and to restore things to being in harmony or at one is another way of phrasing it. And for us as Christians, we believe that Jesus' death and resurrection and suffering was for us and is something called atonement. First of all, I want us to think about what the cause of the atonement was. And I want to suggest that there are two things. First of all, the cause of the atonement is actually rooted in the love of God. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son." And equally, it's also rooted in the justice of God. Romans 3 verse 25 is a good example. And what we could say is that without love, he wouldn't have sent Jesus. And without justice, he couldn't have sent Jesus. God's love and justice working together means he needed to find a way to pay for the penalty of our sins, because justice requires settlement. If we looked at a judge who took somebody who had murdered a family and the judge just said, "Oh, I tell you what, I'll let you off," we would have said, "Really bad judge, that's not justice, that's not fair." When things happen, there have to be consequences. And because of that, if God is who he says he is, there has to be justice. But that justice is rooted in love. So the cause of the atonement is actually a combination of God's love for us and his justice working together. But the next question then is, was it really necessary? And if we're being perfectly honest, no, it wasn't. If we look at 2 Peter 2 verse 4, we see this really interesting verse that it says God didn't even spare angels when they sinned. So actually, God didn't have to save us. But it was because of his love for us that he decided to. He could have treated us the same as the angels, but instead he chose to come and to make a way for us to be right. So therefore, atonement was the consequence of God's decision. And you can look at that a little bit further if you like. Think of this account of Jesus on the road to Emmaus, that when he's talking to the people, that he actually unpacks the Bible to show it was necessary for God to do this. Or in Hebrews 2 verse 17, it says he had to be made like us in order to make the payment for our sins. And a little bit later in Hebrews, only Jesus' sacrifice was actually sufficient for us. So what we see is that actually it wasn't it wasn't a necessity for God to do it, but he chose to because of his love for us. But let's take that a stage further to think of what the nature of the atonement was. It actually points that Jesus was being obedient for us. He left heaven and he chose the cross. In other words, you're sort of talking about forgiveness and relationship. The atonement is actually about God bringing about both our forgiveness and bringing us back into relationship. Jesus had to live on earth as a human being in order to earn that sense of righteousness, to become our righteousness. And the Bible teaches us that Jesus suffered for us. Hebrews 5 verse 8 talks about Jesus learning obedience through suffering. What we see when we look at the atonement is we see the pain of the cross. The cross, make no mistake, was absolutely excruciating. If you ever read about it, where it's actually a slow asphyxiation, where somebody has to lift themselves up from the nails through the feet in order to be able to breathe because of the way their arms are stretched out, and their whole body rotating around the nails with a scourge back against the cross. Make no mistake, Jesus suffered for us. The pain of the cross. But also Jesus took the pain of sin. He carried the weight of it all. How do you feel when you've done something wrong? How does it make you feel? Imagine how Jesus felt on the cross, carrying not just what you and I had done, but some of the most horrific, horrible things that ever happened. Holocaust, genocide, the murder of innocents. Jesus took all of that on you and me, and he felt the pain of that. But he also felt the pain of abandonment. Remember, he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus, in perfect relationship with the Father, loses that relationship and instead takes on the pain of God's wrath against sin, God's righteous anger burning against all those things that have been done. The nature of Jesus' atonement for us was incredible. So what do we see through this idea of atonement? What we see is that in the picture of the cross, Jesus became our substitute. He took our place and he bore our sins on the cross. He took the weight of God's anger and justice against all the things that had ever been done throughout all of time. He did that for you and for me. He took our place. God loved us so much that he sent his only Son. May I never lose the wonder of the cross. May I see it like the first time standing as a sinner lost. Sometimes we take the cross for granted, but what we realise in Jesus' death and resurrection is that Jesus atoned for what we'd done wrong to put us back into relationship with God and became our substitute.